part 3 of the foreword continues to talk about God. More specifically, it talks about the first source and center, which we would normally think of as God the Father, I guess. Well, definitely. So a whole section devoted to this. To begin with, it says, total infinite reality is existential in 7 phases and as 7 coordinate absolutes. And at first I thought it was going to start talking about different dimensions here or something. And when it goes on, I like the first, this is 7 parts, and the first 3 are God the Father, Son, and Spirit. Then there's the Isle of Paradise, which is mainly a geographic location as far as I understood. And then these bigger parts of deity, of God, the deity absolute, universal absolute, and unqualified absolute. So I guess it doesn't really seem to fit with my first impression, but my first thought was, oh wow, it's going to talk, because it's talking about 7 phases of total infinite reality, being existential, so existence, 7 phases of existence. And I'm like, wow, that sounds kind of like 7 different dimensions. And that reminded me of when they asked Ross Peterson, I think it was, how many different dimensions are there? And he said 14 or 15, depending on how you look at it. And so if each one of these 7 different phases had like 2 different aspects or something, there you go, that would be like 14 dimensions. So I don't know, perhaps it is true in some sense, but it just would be hard to imagine that like dimension number 13 of existence would be like a part of the unqualified absolute. When things like that, universal absolute, unqualified absolute, are supposed to be these aspects of God that are so far beyond anything we could approach, especially at this point, that how could that be a dimension that housed people like us or something, so it seems like these can't directly be related to dimensions. It just threw me the way it started talking about that. Total infinite reality is existential in 7 phases and as 7 coordinate well, it says in 7 phases and as 7 coordinate absolutes, and it goes on to list, I guess, what could be just the absolutes. Absolutes being God the Father, God the Son, God the Spirit, the Isle of Paradise, and then these 3 absolutes, the deity absolute, universal absolute, and unqualified absolute. So I guess, perhaps that still leaves room for this 7 phases being related to 14 dimensions of Ross Peterson. Okay, enough of that. It goes on to say, God, as the first source and center, is primal in relation to total reality. Well, and that sounds good, coming from a fundamentalist Christian perspective, as I used to really be in. Well, God better be primal in relation to total reality, because that's the whole idea, right? In the beginning was God, and then God created everything else. So, again and again, I really get struck by this unity with the core cosmology of the Christian religion. More so here than you find from a lot of the other channeled material. I think the Urantia Book is really unique in its harmony with Christianity, so it's almost sad to see people out there attacking the book based upon how it conflicts with the Bible. And notice I said that it harmonizes with the core cosmology of the Christian religion and not necessarily with the Bible itself in every aspect. Anyway, before I rabbit trail too much, so it says God is primal in relation to total reality unqualifiedly. Thank you. The first source and center is infinite as well as eternal, and is therefore limited or conditioned only by volition, meaning, of course, only if he wills to be limited can God be limited in any way, shape, or form. So it goes on. God, the universal Father, is the personality of the first source and center, and as such maintains personal relations of infinite control over all coordinate and subordinate sources and centers. So we're going to find out a lot about these coordinate sources and centers and subordinate sources and centers. And obviously it's talking about, first of all, the first source and center, second source and center, third source and center, meaning the three members of the Trinity. But also there seems to be a tremendous subdivision of what we formerly in Christianity, everything we lumped under God, or at least lumped under the Trinity, seems to have a lot more to it. You know, especially when we get down to the level of things that impact us. You know, and I think this gets back to this whole thing with Jesus Christ being a creator's son, according to the Urantia Book. And it will talk about those in depth later and what that means. And what I've taken away from it is, to a certain degree, in a sense, each of these creator sons represents some perfect concept of interaction between parts of the Godhead. So, for instance, Jesus Christ being what this book says, one of those creator sons, namely Michael, I guess is the name they assigned to him, would be a perfect, I don't really want to say reflection, almost instantiation of a certain aspect of that is a direct result of interaction of the Trinity, or interrelationships within the Trinity. So, you know, what this is getting at is, just because it says Jesus Christ was Christ Michael, a creator son, not to be confused with this second source and center, as in God the Son, second member of the Godhead. You know, at first glance, the Christian, you know, a dyed-in-the-wool Christian, I'm sure, would jump up and say, oh, well, that's obviously heresy, because we all know that Christ, of course, was God the Son. You know, the Bible clearly says that. I'm sure those words would come right out of the mouth of a Christian. But I have absolutely no doubt that if you really take the time and dig into these teachings as they're laid out, like that one, for example, and go back and compare it to every single passage that you're using, like when it's talking about, in the beginning was the Word was God, the Word was with God, and then all the statements that Christ made about himself and him being the Son of God and God being his Father, all of that fits perfectly well with the cosmology that lays out here. The Urantia Book does not contradict that cosmology at all. It simply fleshes it out. And, you know, this is really, I think, a key point. It's a key point for me. I think it's a key point overall. Is that anything, you know, I don't care what the facts would be, any statement that came down out of who knows where and said, this is an expansion of the truths that you got from the Bible. You know, if it were possible, if God himself came down and sat down on a rock and started scribbling on a stone tablet and said, these are the expanded truths where I'm telling you more about what I told you in the Bible, even if that was true, I assure you that every single argument you can lay against the Urantia Book, you could levy against anything that would be written. Because any expansion of the truths that exist from the past in the Christian religion, in the Bible, in the traditional teachings of the Christian religion, Christianity, mainstream Christianity, whatever, and I'm sure the same thing would apply to all other world religions and philosophies. Any addition, any fleshing out, any extra information is going to inevitably conflict with how we filled in the gaps. Because think about it. In the Bible, we take these snippets of information and we do a tremendous amount of gap filling. By and large, the gap filling is logical. I mean, it does, I think, just about the best possible job of tying together the scant information we have. But of course, an inevitable consequence of that is when you get more details, when you get a statement that says, oh, by the way, Jesus Christ was this creator son, one of many, 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 many creator sons, but still the only begotten Son, in the sense that he is the only embodiment of this one ideal interacting between God the Father and God the Spirit, or the Son and the Spirit. I'm sorry, I shouldn't even say anything like that, because it will spell out in clear detail how those creator sons came about. But I do remember that they are, each one is an embodiment of a specific combination, of specific consequence of the interaction of the persons of the Godhead. Therefore, each one is the only one that embodies that concept. And sure, many Christians will probably say, oh, well, that's just sidestepping the issue. Now you're just playing with words and twisting them to make it fit this statement that said it was the only begotten Son. But look, if you truly read the account as it came from the Urantia Book, it is a necessary concept that he be the only begotten Son. And one of the tremendous values of this work is that it laboriously takes many, many statements from the Bible and clarifies them, tries to give them what the original statements were, even before whatever the prophet or seer was that took them down or whatever, and then show how they apply to the teaching that is giving you, demonstrating the complete harmony. Harmony with our interpretations? No. Harmony with our former traditions and our doctrines? No. But of course, those things had to be imperfect, because they involve us, and we're at the bottom rung. You know, we're definitely not approaching perfection by any stretch of the imagination. So of course, and so any argument that says, oh, there's conflict there, therefore the Urantia Book has to be false, well, those are flawed arguments, because I'm saying those arguments would inevitably be levied no matter what the information was that came through. So just saying that there is conflict with traditional views when new information is given really tells us nothing. You know, it can be no argument. The only kind of argument against validity would be one that said, you know, across the board, there's blatant opposite portrayals, you know, where it's saying the exact opposite thing that the Bible is saying, or things like that, and it's definitely not the case. You know, it's a difficult thing to communicate maybe, but the vibe you get from this book, the spirit of the book that it is written in, is a spirit of goodness, one of the love of truth, one of positivism and upliftment, enlightenment, goodness, holiness, you name it. So, yeah, again, complete harmony. And I know that's a safe statement. And we'll continue in the next video, going over this section 3 of the foreword in detail. I'm sorry, I just think it's important not to leave out anything, and just really spend some time talking about it.